My cartoon jumble as it stands has 5 layers, 3 of which I've rasterized, 2 of which I have not edited. I'm just using as is. But what I need to do, I need to go through and delete some just to make it flow a little bit better. And an easy way to do that is to get rid of eyes. So I've done that on these first 2 layers. And I might do that with this one as well, though that's really a nice composition just in and of itself. But how do we do that? Well, we make sure the layer we're working with is rasterized. And then we can just lasso and delete. And if there's overlaps that we don't think are that useful, I can go back to older layers. I can zoom in with Command plus. So for something like this, I might cut this out. So that looks clean. And you can get pretty picky. And this isn't the project to be a perfectionist on, but to introduce us to these principles. So if I'm really picky, I'll try to clean up every edge, but we're not doing logo design quite yet. But that's kind of a nicer shape. So editing little things. Sometimes I'll just do a big chunk and erase it out like that. Kind of opens it up and then makes me react to it. And then this has a lot of kind of interesting things, but I don't want it to overlap too much, especially where it gets really kind of messy and congested visually. Sometimes I'll just use the outside lines. And this is where the tablet's really helpful, because you can follow more organic shapes that way. So like writing, good art can sometimes just be good editing. But in order to do it correctly, you have to know which layer you're affecting. And that can sometimes be difficult. So in order to know which layer I'm going to delete from, I might play with the eyeball here, make sure it's that layer that's selected before I select and delete. And then to deselect, you can just hit Command D. All right. Now this is the really messy one. In order to edit that, I need to rasterize it first, otherwise it will give me this error message. So what do? I right click on the title area of the layer, anywhere in that gray title part, and say rasterize. And now sure enough, it will let me circle things like the eyes and delete them. And you definitely don't want to over-rely on one image, even if it's your coolest image and you really love it. This has to be your own composition, where hopefully, like Arturo Herrera's work that inspired it, no specific image is clearly recognizable. So it will be stronger through editing. And sometimes what I'll do is I'll select something and then realize, no, I want it in that layer, but I'm going to take that same selection and try deleting it from other layers to clean it up. Like this, I want this kind of haunch, but instead of deleting it from this layer, I'm going to delete the distractions from it in the other layers so that that comes through really cleanly. All right. And then my last layer here, you'll notice this line quality is much, much thinner. Sometimes that can be good. Sometimes that can be a big distraction. In order to delete from it, I have to rasterize it. And then I can delete things like eyes, anything too recognizable, heads. I like the fur and the textures, but maybe I don't want it everywhere. So it's like being an abstract painter, and just figuring out where do you want all the activity and all the shapes and all the detail to be. You can also, and I'll often do this, I'll turn off these other layers so you can see what I'm doing. So that's what I took out, but you can also do things like this with your reference material, just like you can with collage. Even though this is all from the same image, I can take this bunch of it and move it with the move tool after I've selected it. I have to be on the layer, but I can move this around. I can transform it separately from the other part of that. So I can try it kind of like this. And if I set it with other layers, deselect, and see how that works. So by moving that section of it up and playing with it, you get more of an image. You might also notice that that image is a little bit fainter just because the lines are so much thinner than this. So you can have a lot of line variety. And I've got this little blue line that I'm just going to leave in there. That's kind of a gestural drawing behind one of them. So now I'm just going to delete a few little areas from my last layer, and then I think I'll be done. I don't think any one reference is overwhelmingly stronger than others. And I don't think anything is particularly easily recognizable either in my composition. And that's the goal. Okay. And it's still all just black and white, and we're staying black and white for now, because if you can solve all of the design issues and the visual interest issues in black and white, then when we add color and texture and other effects, it's going to succeed. Whereas if it doesn't work in black and white, you can't save it with a lot of color. Okay, lastly, I'm just going to clean that up a little bit. I'm going to break it up where it's overlapping. So that these triangular shapes have a little bit more compositional power. And the shortcut to move around is holding down spacebar when you're zoomed in, and you get the hand tool. So is this perfect? No, there's little debris, little things that I might not want, but it's good enough for this exercise for sure. If this is going to be a portfolio project that you print for the midterm, you can go back and work on it. But I like how it's open in some areas. I like how there's this kind of swirling figure 8 to the composition. I like how it's really busy and explosive here and more fluid in other places. So let's just go with that. So I'm going to save the work, File, Save. And now I'm going to show you how we can finalize this and try on different color options. So I know a lot of you are excited for that. So I have a background layer, which is just solid white. That's what we started with. Then I brought in these 5 different references, and I eventually rasterized them, edited them, transformed them, rotated them, made them into this composition. Now I'm going to hold down Option on the keyboard and go up to the Layer drop-down menu and say Merge Visible, which is different than Flatten Image. So if I hold down Option, this is a huge Photoshop hack. Really, really helpful. If I hold down Option when I hit Merge Visible, it will not replace any of my previous layers. Instead, it will make a new layer at the very top that combines them all. All right, so now I have a new layer. If I turn off all the others, it doesn't change because this is now combined. It's at 100% opacity. It's on normal mode, right? It's just a black and white combined coloring sheet. So think of it as making a photocopy of everything. You've layered up all these transparencies. Now you've made a photocopy of it. You have one clean layer. This allows us to do a few things. The thing I want us to do is I want us to cut out the black lines, not just turn it to multiply, but cut it out. And Arturo Herrera often does his compositions and then cuts them out physically with a blade out of something like felt or out of glossy paper. And it gives it a real intentionality. So to cut it out, we have to use a new selection tool. It doesn't make sense to use the lasso to try to select all of the white and delete it. But if I've turned off every layer behind it, if we try that, this is what will happen. I cut out a shape in the white and I hit delete. What will show up is a grid. And that grid is Photoshop's way of telling us, this gray grid, that there is nothing there. No pixels. Not white pixels, nothing. Right? What we want is to only have black lines and nothing. So how can we do that? We're going to use the selection tool that's underneath the magic lasso, or underneath the lasso tool. It's called the magic wand tool. So if it's on the quick selection tool, you want to hold down on it until you get the kind of drawer options and then click on the magic wand. Now, because it's all one sheet, think of it as like a photocopy, and I want to get rid of all the white and cut out all the black, I am going to use the magic wand tool, and I have to pay attention to the settings here. It's a point sample, which means wherever I click, the exact pixel I click on, that is the color I am selecting. And then it has a tolerance of 32, which means it will choose all pixels that are within a third close to that color. 32 is the default. It's a good default for this kind of thing. It's anti-alias, which has to do with how it smooths around curves. And we want it set not on contiguous. So we're going to uncheck contiguous. Contiguous would mean it would only select the white pixels when the white pixels are touching where you selected. But if we uncheck contiguous, it will select them everywhere. So I'm going to hit deselect because to undo the little lasso selection I made, and I'm going to click on a white pixel anywhere, and you'll see that the magic wand will select all of the white. And then I hit delete. And if we had good reference, and you'll see this was pretty clean, remember we checked it, we can zoom way in, we can hit Command D to deselect, and we'll see that the edges of our lines, they're not perfectly smooth, they're still pixel based, but it's pretty much black pixels on an empty background. So a nice clean cutout. And then if there was anything that wasn't black, like this blue line that was in one of my references, it's still going to be there. And that's fine. But what we did is we got rid of all the white. So now we can color. What if we didn't want to cut it out of black paper? What if we wanted to cut it out of red paper? Because we have a nice cutout, we can now double click on the layer. The same place you right click in order to rasterize, you left click and double click and you'll get what are called the layer styles. And it's very simple to then just add a color, which is called color overlay. And we can add any color we like. We can select it from different images. We have this whole spectrum we can play with. And it will fill every pixel that remains in that layer with that color. I tend to like warm colors. They're more saturated in the upper right-hand corner, less saturated as you go down, and they go darker and grayer, as you go to the bottom left. And then you can play with the spectrum. Ooh, hot pink. Why not? Really bright magenta. Okay, you can also play with the opacity of that coloring layer, which allows the black pixels, which are the layer, to come through, right? So because they're black, when you play with the opacity, the color is just going to get darker and darker. So that's under the layer style options. Now this is why I love layer styles, because they don't actually change the pixels in your layer. They're a stylization that goes on top of your pixels. So what does that look like? Well, now you'll see layer 3 has a little effects icon under it with an eyeball. And as I layer different effects with layer styles, it will have a different eyeball for each one. And at any time, I can just turn them off. So it's a great way to try different solutions out.